so I'm going to share it with you tonight. So let me just pull up my document here. Okay. October 31st is, in my opinion, the spookiest and best holiday. Devin Griffin returns home after performing in his Sunday morning church service at 1:30 in the afternoon. He decided he wanted to unwind after a pretty long morning, so he went to go play video games in his room. He kind of noticed that the house was quiet, a little more quiet than usual after he'd been playing for a while. It was kind of late in the afternoon, and he knew his family, especially his mom, was usually awake by this time, so he goes to find her. Her name is Suzanne, and she is 46 years old. So Devin takes it upon himself to go and look around the house to locate his family, and when he enters the master bedroom, he finds his mother, Susan, and his stepfather, William, lying in bed with their maroon comforter pulled up over their heads. I don't know if they normally slept like this or why Devin wasn't really alarmed by this. Hoping to wake them, he starts casually sort of talking to his mom as he works his way around to her side of the bed. He sort of notices that her foot is sticking out a little from under the covers, and he kind of taps on her leg to get her attention, but she doesn't respond. He then pulls the covers down and sees this bloody mess soaked into his mother's pillow. At first, Devin was so surprised by this, he thought that his mother and stepfather were playing a prank on him because it's Halloween, right? But as the scene before him comes into clearer focus, he realizes this is not a Halloween prank. He then runs out of the house before looking for his brother, Derek, who at the time was 23. He had no clue what had happened and if he was in danger if he still stayed in the house. At this point, he calls his aunt for help, and she shows up and calls 911. Detectives enter the house and find that William and Susan had been shot to death in their bed. According to the coroner, William was shot 5 times in the head and face. Susan had been sexually assaulted and then shot 3 times at close range. Devin's brother that I mentioned before, Derek, had a bedroom upstairs, and it was locked upon the arrival of the police. Police had to kick the door in, and they found the young man curled up in bed, facing the wall. He was dead of blunt force trauma, and they said that he most likely died within minutes of the first blow. Investigators located a claw hammer in the house, as well as muddy footprints near the pond, leading the police to believe that this is where the other murder weapon was located, but they did drain the pond and did not find a weapon. Ottawa County Sheriff Bob Bratton confirmed the deaths of William Liske, Susan Liske, and their 23-year-old son, Derek Griffin. There was no apparent evidence of a struggle, and all 3 bodies were found in their own beds. William B.J. Liske Jr., the son of William, was immediately identified as a suspect in this case. He was charged with 1 count of murder right at the time of his arrest. This allowed them to hold him in order to present the case to a grand jury. Now, Devin had spent the previous night at his biological dad's house and then came home to his mother's house that morning to change into his These records on PJ started early in 2002 when PJ, just 16 years old, was placed on house arrest. I found that a little strange, but let me tell you why first. This is the first time that Bill Sr. had to call the police to come to their house. PJ had been threatening to harm himself, and his father had no clue how to stop him. And when the police arrived, PJ attacked them. Now, I don't think house arrest is the best solution for that, but by 2004, PJ started escalating from threatening to harm himself to attacking other people. That October, he got into a fight with his stepmother, Suzanne, in fact, hitting her very hard in the chest. 2 months later, he was charged with criminal assault for, again, hitting Suzanne, and robbery for stealing her car keys. At the time, he was found incompetent to stand trial on those charges, but they were later dropped. Trying to get BJ the help that he so clearly needed, his family moved him to a group home in Sandusky, where he would get mental health treatment. But it didn't really seem to be working all that well. BJ was involved in several fights with his own father when he went to pick him up, and other people at the facility. In fact, the police had to be called on 3 separate occasions. So as I mentioned before, BJ, 18 at the time, was no longer living at home. His father had kicked him out when he had attacked Susan in the shower. That attack landed BJ a stay in the hospital because apparently it was this big mess. The police were called, he attacked them, and he ended up in the hospital where he received treatment for schizoactive bipolar disorder type. I know this can be treated with proper medication, but you do have to take the medicine, and I don't know that BJ was really apt to do this. So, you may be wondering, why is BJ attacking Susan over and over? Well, he had not taken a liking to her because she attempted to impose order in their house after she married BJ's father. Despite endless fights and several dangerous situations, William never gave up on his son. In February 2006, he filed for guardianship for BJ. According to court records, the 18-year-old had been hospitalized for, as I mentioned, schizoactive disorder, bipolar type. So, William really wanted BJ to get the help that he needed, but he was 18, so I guess, and I'm unsure of how this works because it really kind of depends on what state you live in. Bill could get guardianship of BJ and help him get into a halfway house or a group home and just help make proper healthcare decisions for him by being his guardian, at least from what I read. I read that when BJ was on his medication, he did really well, but he would stop taking it because he thought he was fine, and then he would start drinking and smoking pot. So BJ's father really was just trying to keep him in his life and keep his son out of trouble. He visited him often at the halfway house, and the week before the murders, Bill took vacation time from work so that he and BJ could go deer hunting together. They had gone to the family's hunting cabin, and they only returned less than 24 hours before BJ would kill his own father. Now, family friends had talked to Bill, or William, I guess I use that interchangeably, about his son and their family's safety around his son. They thought that Bill really needed to take precautions. Neighbors believed that it was BJ who had killed and tortured their pets over the years, even though no one had ever caught him in the act of doing this. Investigators who interviewed family friend Mark Grideel wrote in a report that Bill often called Mark to help if BJ was there at the gathering, and he told the police that everyone had a great time. He didn't see Derek, the 23-year-old, but that was not unusual because Derek and BJ didn't really get along. Now, BJ rarely spent the night at the Liske house because of the past violent fights between him and Susan and, well, him and the rest of the family. But Bill had been drinking, and he didn't think it was a good idea to drive his son back home that night. The party broke up around midnight, and when investigators searched the house, they found a bed made up in the living room on the sofa for BJ. It is reported that neighbors heard gunshots around 6:30 a.m. on the morning of October 31st. This would later be marked as consistent for the time of death for Bill and Susan. Derek was last heard from at 2 p.m. on October 30th. Based on several factors, it is determined that Derek was killed before Bill and his mother, Susan. When Devin returned home from spending the weekend with his dad at 9:30 in the morning, he only stayed long enough to change his shirt, and then he left for church. He remembers seeing BJ at the house, but Devin was only there about 5 minutes. They did have a conversation, and it did seem odd to Devin. BJ apparently asked where he was going, how long he would be gone, and Devin really said it was pretty uncharacteristic of BJ to even act like he cared. Investigators spoke to Devin after the murders, of course, and he said he couldn't think of anything else that was said except that BJ really seemed to be acting happier than normal. To explain, Devin stated that normally BJ is gloomy, and when detectives asked Devin why he thought BJ was acting happier, he said he was happier, more upbeat, more talkative. He said BJ is normally slow and kind of darkish and gloomy. After Devin left the house to go to church, BJ left in the family's Ford F-150. He drove to their hunting cabin that they had left the day before. In fact, he stopped along the way and got himself a Subway sandwich. Now, the scene that Devin escaped from was considered grisly, even from the standpoint of law enforcement. After getting out, he called his aunt and tried to tell her what he found, and she came to try to calm him down and call the authorities for help. Now, we talked about how they were shot, and originally police thought that maybe Susan had been moved because William was in a sleeping position, so they believe he was killed first, but Susan was kind of in a not sleeping position, like she was startled awake and then shot, which made me really sad because that means that she pretty much knew what was happening. So police immediately focus in on BJ, as I said, and they head towards the family cabin. They apprehend BJ, arrest him, and charge him with aggravated murder in each of the deaths. In fact, they arrived so quickly that he did not even get a chance to eat yes, maybe his mental health did this because he wasn't properly on the right medication